Shalom, shalom. Call all Yahweh Bashim Shai, Bashim Rakakwadash, Barakatah. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of the great millstone who rule well, and salutations to the brethren on the four corners of the earth, pushing word and truth and sincerity. I'm coming back with another lesson on the slave trade. I just wanted to go into another region of the world where nobody knows where slaves actually went. Is the Philippines, and the Philippines were colonized by the Spanish and the Portuguese in the early 1500s, and they actually brought slaves from various. They brought slaves from various parts of the world, such as Cuba, Puerto Rico, Africa, and even parts of South America and Mexico, because the Philippines was governed by the Spanish, and at that time, the Spanish crown had a new viceroyalty or a new region in Mexico. You know, that was called New Spain. So I just wanted to jump into some history really quick. But before that, I want to read Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 64. It says, "Then the Lord shall scatter thee among all people, from the one end of the earth even unto the other." And what do you think the Lord used to scatter us among the people? It wasn't a migration; it was a slave trade. We were forced to be scattered. So the Lord used the slave trade to actually propel this prophecy forth, man. You know, and we were shipped all over the world by none other than Esau himself. You know, the Hamites and the Arabs. Which are the Ishmaelites. It says, "And there thou shalt serve other gods." Why? Because we were scattered all over the world, and we were in these different parts of the land where they had other gods. And through the process of time, we began worshiping those other gods, which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, even wood and stone. So you got Islam, Christianity, and then you got the other gods, that fall right down the line, man. Those other nations that fall right down the line. There are too many religions to count, and I guarantee you, Jake is in every single one of them, man. You know, because of the history in the slave trade, man. This is the reason why we have been shipped all over the world. Where you're getting Jake, uh, blowing up. You're getting Jake waking up all over the world, man. Let me go into the history of the Spanish slave trade. This is from the Wikipedia. History of the Spanish slavery in the Philippines. It says slavery had been present in the Philippine Islands even before the archipelago was integrated with Spanish Empire following the conquest. And they were enslaving, their own people. They were enslaving their own people regards to a so-called ranking system on color. You know, and of course you already had some jakes all over there. Depending on the previous slave trades and the previous empires. It says policies that the Spanish crown established for its empire in the Americas were extended to its colony in the Philippines. The viceroyalty of New Spain oversaw the Philippine administratively, and the terminus of the Manila Galleon in Acapulco saw the importation of Philippine slaves who were labeled chinos. Crown policy regarding slavery were not always adhered in practice. And they had disputes about slavery, about the way you're treating the slaves, things of that nature. But it all ends up being the same, man. You know, Jake was still condemned to slavery by the hands of the so-called white man. So I'm gonna go down here to the comparison of Spanish slavery and native Philippine slavery. It says Spaniards considered it legitimate to enslave non-Christian captives from wars and trade them legally in the past. This is because they did not consider this as an uncivilized and unchristian act, because they believed that men were not created equal, which is true. Men aren't created equal, and the inferior men may be ruled by the superior ones, which is true. You know, Christians, however, were anticipated to show sympathy to the people suffering, and this made some masters free their slaves. Like I said, they had some disagreements on policies and how to treat their slaves, which in the end doesn't really matter, because Jake was still enslaved at this time. So a lot of them apprenticed their slaves so they could still work under their supervision once they were freed. There were two major types of legal slaves: the esclavos, which are Negroes, esclavos Negroes who were Africans purchased from Portugal. So these were Jakes that were bought from Portugal by the Spanish men that were brought over to the Philippines while they were colonizing. It says, and the esclavos blancos, who were Moros taken from wars. So, these were prisoners of war, man. They were usually sold in public auctions. You know, people from both the middle and the upper classes bought them as well as the clergy. And it says they were sold on public auctions, man. And those public slave auctions were actually told in the scriptures as well. You know, just to prove that the people that, were sent over to the Philippines in slavery are the Israelites is Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 48. Therefore thou shalt serve thine enemies, which the Lord shall send against thee. And our enemies were sent against us. The enemies were sent from Portugal and different parts of Europe over to Africa, the West Coast, and the East Coast to pick up Israel, man, and to ship them all over the world, you know, and in hunger and in thirst and in nakedness and in want of all things. And he shall put a yoke of iron upon thy neck until he have destroyed thee. So that yoke of iron that was put about our neck, it's synonymous with with chains being about us as a whole, but you also have slave auctions, man, which they used to actually parade us around with yokes of iron and shackles on our feet, man, and handcuffs on our hands. You know, only the Israelites got such a harsh treatment, man. If you Google, men with yokes of or slaves with yokes of iron, all you're gonna see that pops up is gonna be Israel, man. You know, gonna be so-called black man, gonna be the so-called Hispanic man, the Native American man, and by the way, you had Jake, you had Native Americans that were actually being shifted or shipped from America over to Spain, and then over to Portuguese and over to Philippines as well, man. You know, and the Puerto Ricans, Ephraim, they were done the same way, man. And I just wanted to go into a little bit of the slavery in the Spanish New World colonies because this is where you get the idea that American slavery was slavery in general was nothing but an economic conquest. This is slavery in the Spanish New World colonies. It says slavery in the Spanish American colonies was an economic and social institution, central of the operations of the Spanish Empire. It bound Africans and indigenous peoples to a relationship of colonial exploitation. The Spanish colonists provided the Americas with the colonial precedent for slavery. Early on, however, opposition from the enslaved of Indians and from influential Spaniards moved the crown to limit the bondage of indigenous people and initiate debates that challenged the idea of slavery based on race. Now, like I said, they had a so-called ranking system based on your skin color and how they should treat you, on what manner of slave you should be. Spaniards regarded some indigenous people as tribute under the encomienda system during the late 1400s and the part of the 1500s. Now, I wanted to go into this word encomienda because this is something that was rampant during slavery and during the colonial conquest of South and Central America as well. This is encomienda from the Wikipedia. It says encomienda was a labor system in Spain and its empire and rewarded conquerors with the labor of particular groups of subject people. It was first established in Spain during the Roman period, but used also following the Christian conquest of Muslim territories. It was applied on a much larger scale during the Spanish colonization of the Americas. In the Philippines, conquered peoples were considered vassals of the Spanish monarch. The crown awarded an encomienda as a grant to a particular individual. In the conquest era of the 16th century, the grants were considered to be monopoly on the labor of particular groups of Indians. So now they were actually using that encomienda system to gain favor and to gain riches off of the slaves, man. Held in perpetuity by the grant holder called the encomendero and his descendants. So this is not only something that was put in practice, but something that actually fell generation to generation. Scriptures say that they leave their riches to their children, man. You know. Now I want to go. I want to get a visual of this encomienda. Let's see images. Here's a good one here. So let's see if I can blow it up. Let me see if I can get a. Hope you brothers can see this. But you have you have the top of the food chain, you have the bottom of the food chain, right? But this is all depending on, where you were born and what your skin color looks like, right? But most of all importance, if you look at the top of the food chain, peninsulares, which are Spaniards born in Spain. So these are Edomites. So they systematically designed a social engineered this what they call it, social classes, just like they did today. So at the bottom you have the enslaved persons brought from Africa and the Caribbean. Then you have the Native American Indians. You got Gad, or you got the native indigenous peoples to that region. Then you have the mestizos, born of Spanish and Native American Indian parents. So now you have how they say the half breeds. This is where they get the Indian blood quantum. This is where you got children that are born of Spanish and Mexican descent, or Spanish and uh, Native American descent, or Spanish and Philippine Indian descent, or Spanish and Puerto Rican Indian descent. And you got the Creoles, born in New Spain of Spanish parents. So you got those that were immigrated over to New Spain or Mexico, or or the Philippines, or any other Spanish-speaking country where it was colonized, and you got the first generation that were born over there. These are the Creoles. These are second to the food chain. Then you got the Peninsulars, which are the Spaniards born in Spain, the Edomites. You know, so like the scriptures say, man, there's nothing new under the sun. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, man. So they've had this social class actually, uh, actually, down in the books and practicing in the social class for 500 years, man. You see, it says 1512, where the encomienda system was established. Now it's 2018, you know. So 516 years later, man. It's like 506 years later, you know. You see the same social structures here in society. So if you go back and let me go back to this encomienda. Matter of fact, let me go back to the slavery in Spanish New Colonies. So you have second paragraph here. You have the Spanish slavery in the Americas did not diverge drastically from that in other European colonies. It reshuffled the Atlantic world's populations through forced migrations, helped transfer American wealth to Europe, and promoted racial and social hierarchies, like I just said, man, throughout the empire. Spanish enslavers justified their wealth and status earned at the work of the mines at the expense of captive workers by considered inferior beings with limited capacities and holding them as personal properties. Chattel slavery, often under barbarous conditions, you know. And the whole document goes into, Cuba, Puerto Rico, Hispaniola. So Simeon, Ephraim, Manasseh, and back to Judah again. It even goes into Benjamin, you know, and how that transatlantic, not transatlantic, but that trans-Pacific slave trade went, man. You know, so you want to know where you get movies like Pirates of the Caribbean from? This is where you get it, man. You know, from actual history of the slave trades, and in those East Indian companies. You know, and I just wanted you brothers to look at a map as well. This is a map of Manila galleons, or the trans-Pacific slave trade. Starting from Spain and Portugal and leading, all over the southwestern hemisphere. So you have the map showing Maine, the Portuguese in blue, and the Spanish in the white. Oceanic slave trade routes in the 16th century. So you have Slovakia. So what you have the white, I'll just start with Spain first. You have Spain, and you have Spain following from Seville to Havana, which is Cuba. Then you have Veracruz, and you have Acapulco, going all the way around the globe, coming back here to Manila, which is a city in the Philippines, and it going right from Manila straight back to the other side of the world here to Acapulco, and then from Acapulco going to Panama, and from Panama going to Lima, and Callao. Then going back from Lima to Callao to Panama, then you have Cartagena, Slovakia, and Portobello, then back to Havana, Cuba, and right back over to Spain, man. So you have 10 tribes here that have taken part in this South Pacific slave trade, man. Then on top of that, you got the Portuguese, man, which start from Antwerp over to Lisbon and Seville, then going right down here to Brazil, man, to get Asher, Recife, Salvador, and Rio, man. Right on over to Goa, which is in India. Then you have it transferring over here to Kochi. Then you have going over to Malacca. Then you have Tidore and Ternate. Slack if I'm pronouncing these words wrong. And then you have Macau and Nagasaki. And Nagasaki's in Japan. So you got slaves that also went to Japan, man. So what does that mean? You also have Israelites in Japan. You know. Then you're gonna go all the way back again through Macau, Malacca, Gochi, and then you're gonna go from Kochi all the way over back to Salvador in Brazil, Recife, Slovakia. You're gonna go all the way back over to Azores, Slovakia. I read my lines wrong, but you're gonna go back over to Azores and then back to Lisbon, and then back to Portugal, man, Antwerp, Portugal. You know, so this is how the slave trade in South Pacific transpired, man. You know, because a lot of people just think it was just a transatlantic slave trade. No, at the same time, you had a slave trade going on between two other countries and the Southern Hemisphere. Was apprised of the Northern Kingdom, man, specifically. And then you had parts of Judah, Benjamin, and Levi that were being taken from the coast of Africa, man. You got Mozambique here, you know, and they were being taken from and I read earlier that they were being taken from the east coast of Africa as well, man. The so-called Ethiopian Jews, which you can't dispute that there might be Jake among them, or that there are Jake among them. That's where they got the concept Ethiopian Jew. But those Ethiopians are Hamites, man, specifically Cushites. But the ones that were taken, and I'm pretty sure there were some real Africans taken as well. But most of those that were taken were the Israelites, man. You know, this is how we've been taken and we've been sent all over the world, man. And are made to worship and to serve other gods, which neither our fathers have known. You know, this is what you see. This is Esau forward in the affliction, man. Because going back to the encomienda system, he has the same system today in his social structures, man, in America and all over the world, where Jake is the enslaved persons on the bottom. You know, but except now it's not just the Judites, Benjamites, and Levites. It's all 12 tribes, man, that are at the bottom before the other nations get to the top. Or you have Esau. This is Zechariah 1:15. It says, "And I am very sore displeased with the heathen that are at ease, for I was but a little displeased, but they helped forward with the affliction." And like scriptures say, man, nothing under heaven has been done to any other nation, than it has been done to Israel, man. Look at this. This is ridiculous. You know, this is completely ridiculous. The way they chauffeured us around, man. Not chauffeured us, but the way they shipped us around, man. Like we were cargo. You know, let me get one last scripture because like we used to like brothers like to say, Jake is going to be that remnant that's going to be taken from all over the world, man. And this is proof of it. I just want to read the 11th verse. It says, and it shall come to Isaiah 11 and 11, and it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people, which shall be left from Assyria and from Egypt and from Pathros and from Cush and from Elam and from Shinar and from Hamath and from the islands of the sea. And you just seen the slave trade in the islands of the sea. You seen Elam was considered, it was included in that slave trade. You had Japanese were included in that slave trade. The Chinese were included in that slave trade. You know, then you have the Egyptians. You got other tribes of Africa. You got the Ishmaelites. The Hamites, the Cushites. Because they sold us into slavery also, man. And this is where you get Isaiah 11:11, man. That we're going to be that remnant that's going to be taken from all over the world, man. That's going to be left from all these other countries. Because the slave trade, the Lord forced it to happen through the slave trade, man. So with that, I just wanted to go over a little history, and Lord willing, I'm gonna keep these shows going with different, parts of the globe where Jake was, dispersed. So with that, I want to give all praises to Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem, Rakat Kodash. Double honor to the apostles and elders, great millstone, who rule well, and salutation to the brethren on the four corners of the earth, pushing the word in truth and in sincerity. Shalom.